It is in words. Not all words, not all speaking, but in some. Some words are infected. And it spreads out when the contaminated word is spoken. Oh, we are witnessing the emergence of a new arrangement for life, and our language is its host. It could have sprung spontaneously out of a perception. If it found its way into language, it could leap into reality itself, changing everything. It may be boundless. It may be a god bug.
Okay, Dr. Mendez, look, I don't even believe in UFOs, so I got to stop you there with that god bug thing.
Oh, really? Well, that's very sensible, because UFOs don't exist. But I assure you, there is a monster loose, and it's bouncing through our language, frantically trying to keep its host alive.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks? Why do I say this? Because we got Holy Ghost power!
You're listening to a podcast exploring faith and fear, what scares us and what saves us. This is the fear of God. Hello and welcome to the intersection of faith and fear, where we discuss each week what scares us in order to find what saves us. This is the Fear of God podcast. We are so glad you're here for this episode and this last installment of Phase 1 of 2020. We hope you all have been enjoying this ghoulish stroll down memory lane of the macabre. Check out our pre-cap episode from January for more info about this particular series, where you, our listeners, have been voting on your favorite horror films from the last 20 years, and we cover one from each year. This phase concludes today with the War of the Worlds inspired Pontypool. Speaking to you right now is one of your hosts, Nathan Rouse, and typically with me is fellow co-host Reed Lackey. And guys, he was here, but he got a little sheepish, and he was like, oh my gosh, I forgot, Nathan, to give you your Valentine's Day card. I was like, yeah, I mean, it's crazy times. Lots of things are easy to forget. That was in February, though. I wish you'd remembered it back then, but, whatever. I'm sure it'll be pretty cool, and he'll be back soon. Speaking of back, a few weeks ago, we featured Pod Bro and FOG Secretary of Restorative Justice in the FOG 2020 Presidential Cabinet, Blake Collier. Well, turns out he really likes Pontypool. So guys, Blake is back again. Everyone, tell your friends. Blake, welcome, buddy. It is so glad to have you back for a little more fun. Hello.
How's it? I feel like I'm coming in from the Great Plains of Texas again.
Yeah, whatever. Okay, so Blake, wherever you are currently broadcasting from, as you know, listeners can find us on Twitter, they can find us on Instagram, or they can join us in the Facebook group for lively discussions around horror and genre and Ernest P. Worrell themed media, books, films, and memes. Here at The Fear of God, we explore, we don't explain, except for right now, when I'm going to explain that you, dear listener, can listen to the Fear of God podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, CastBox, anywhere you can find podcasts. While you're at it, guys, don those face masks and then go subscribe to us on your favorite platform. And if that happens to be iTunes, be so kind as to leave us a 5-star rating or glowing review. You can also find us on the web at thefearofgodpodcast.com, where you'll find an episode archive and be able to purchase merchandise from the show. You can see fellow foggers in their fog swag, like t-shirts and mugs and cell phone cases and pillows. And Reed! Hey, buddy! Welcome back to the show!
Podcast.
No. Kiss is kiss. Kiss is kill.
Podcast.
Pontypool podcast.
Please move on.
Posh Spice.
Posh Spice. Oh, Posh Spice.
Yeah. Yes.
That's
Scary
good.
Spice.
Papa Smurf.
Yeah. Whoa.
So, hi everybody. Oh
Hey,
my
buddy.
gosh.
Reed, Blake's back.
It's good to see you, buddy. How are you doing?
Man, it feels like it's been a long time.
It's been so long.
And it won't be that long before it happens again.
No, it's true. It's a good point. That's a good point. No, it's great to see you guys. I can't believe that we're already at the end of this little phase of 2020.
I know.
2020.
I'm glad you said that, Reed, because I almost forgot.
Yeah.
I mentioned Blake being our Secretary of Restorative Justice. Reed, you're my running mate this election year.
I
don't know if you heard.
I didn't.
I'm running out of news on this.
This
But
happened.
all of our initial competition has dropped out and thrown their support behind us. So, buddy, with any luck, we're gonna win.
We're gonna win. I mean, listen.
I don't want to say will, but you know.
Right. I'm not winning much these days, so this is the most hopeful thing I've got going for me is winning that's my favorite moment is when I hear you gloriously declare we won. Yes.
I guess that's how I sound. Yeah.
Every time. Oh, indeed.
Well, why
indeed.
don't Reed? While you're glorying in our hopeful and potential winning, why don't you, as not just my running mate, but as if he can brush off his spectacles for a moment, Lackey the listicle, my occasionally listless making lackey, tell us about some
everybody.
lists.
So,
Good Lord.
Yes, what we have been doing, if you have not been keeping up to speed, which numbers indicate that you have definitely been keeping up to speed, we've been making our way through your top 10 favorite horror films of every year, starting at 2000. We are eventually going to go all the way up to 2020, which is going to be really weird, given what
Straight to the top. Yes.
what 2020 has had to offer for us. But we are now finding ourselves at 2008, which is the concluding year of this phase. We're going to be doing this throughout the year, but taking breaks to do smaller series in between. So this right now is the final installment of 2020 for this phase of this material. We are going to be counting down your top 10 favorites as voted on by you on our website. Horror films of 2008. So right now, unfortunately, I have nowhere to tell you to go to cast your vote for anything because we are concluding this phase. But I'm very excited to dive into this list. And Blake, as our now recurring guest, you have the distinct honor of starting off this list with the listener favorite number 10. Would you do the honors, please? Have fun.
Ooh, okay. Well, your number 10 for 2008 is The Midnight Meat Train by director Ryuhei Kitamura.
That was better than I would have done. It's better than I would have done. No kidding. Have you guys
Better
seen
than the last time.
It is. Have you guys seen Midnight Meat Train?
Yes.
Have you seen this film?
No, but it sounds like a country song or something. Like
Bradley
the Midnight
Cooper
Meat Train to
stars
Georgia.
Coming into town on a midnight meat train.
Sure, that too.
Boy.
Bradley Cooper's in this?
Bradley Cooper stars in it.
Yep.
Yeah, it was before he was like a bona
Bradley
fide
Cooper.
A-lister. Yeah, it was long before he was like the super.
Well, he was on Alias, the TV show. I don't remember exactly when that fell, but that was
Really?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It
He
might have.
He was the unrequited best friend.
Interesting. So this probably followed that, but it
Yeah.
predated like The Hangover, which is my biggest intersection for when he came to like sort of extreme popularity. But no, that's interesting. I did not know that he's on Alias. I've never seen that one. But yeah, Midnight Meat Train is exactly what it sounds like. It's very gross and gory and a midnight meat train. That's
On a train.
what it is. Yeah. Nathan, how about you hit us with number 9? No. I'm going to do you a favor.
I was gonna say.
I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to take number 9. I'm going to take one for the team, and I'm going to let you give number 8 because you deserve to give number 8.
Thank you.
So, number 9 on the list is directed by M. Night Shyamalan. Like we said with Lady in the Water, there's probably no way this winds up in a favorite horror film except on a Fear of God list. It's one that we don't even care for very much. It's The Happening. The Happening, made it to your number 9. I have to think that this is one of, and maybe I'm wrong, but I have to think that this is one of those votes of people just selecting something they knew and had seen. I have to think.
I actually kind of like it.
Shut up.
In a weird,
This has been a good,
in a weird
this has
sort
been a
of
good
way,
run,
yes,
Blake.
yes.
Yeah. Is it too early to cancel next week's episode?
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. So, but it's funny because you know who else loved this film, gave it 3.5 stars, was freaking Roger Ebert. Roger Ebert loved the
That's
Howler.
hilarious.
Thought it was this glorious celebration of B-movie fodder in a high production value. It basically a high production B-movie. Yeah. So, but no,
I don't want to spend the life required to rewatch it, but there's a world where I could envision if you dial in on that frequency that you might find some enjoyment in it.
Sure. I can understand that. And I will
But that's
say
a lot of ifs.
That is a lot of ifs. I don't care for the film. I don't think the film works. I don't like it. I will say that it is among the height at some of M. Night Shyamalan's visual prowess. There are some alarming visuals in it that are very, very effective. Like that shot of the bodies just falling off the building, and there's a couple of sequences that you just look at the scene and you're just like, that's a great shot. Unfortunately, it's couched in a film that is not got a very strong script. It's got some weak performances. So it's just, it doesn't do much for me. But yeah.
Well, cheese and crackers, Reed. Give it a break.
Just eat a hot dog. Okay, so Nathan, take away number 8.
Well, Reed, number 8 on
You're welcome, by the way.
Top 10 of 2008 horror films is voted on by Fear of God listeners. This one's for you, Ned. It is The X-Files, I Want to Believe, directed by Chris Carter. Now,
yes, it is.
This is a decent movie.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
I liked it better than Fight the Future, honestly.
Yeah, I was going to say. Now,
same.
I have a special place in my heart for Fight the Future just because of when I saw it and kind of the intersection of life and media and all that sort of stuff. But
that makes sense.
I do think this is a far more accessible film and is kind of what the film parentheses series always should have been, like just exploded Monster of the Week type stuff.
Yeah.
But no, I haven't watched it in quite a long time, but it's good. It's competent.
Yeah, I like it. Blake, you seen it?
Yeah. I'm a big fan. I like you. I think I like it better than Fight the Future, and it's mainly because of Billy Connolly.
Oh yeah.
His role is great. Yeah, he's great in it.
Yeah, I really. It has been some time since ironically, I own this film, but it has been some time since I've revisited it. Its appearance on this list actively made me be like, I might watch that because it has been a long time since I've seen that, and I remember really enjoying it. So I might check that out. Blake, hit us with number 7.
Number 7 is a little. This is more obscure. I'm kind of impressed with this one. Splinter, directed by Toby Wilkins. I remember seeing this randomly.
This is the Ninja Turtle spinoff, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Sweet.
Sure.
Ninja Master Rat.
This is like a weird little one-off indie film that came out.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing it. I rented the movie at the video store. Do y'all remember those?
No. Fondly.
Memories. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this looks kind of odd and interesting. And I was kind of into the exploration of film at that time. That was at the height of really digging into cinema, especially horror. And so I checked it out, and by the time I was done, I was like, I have no idea what to do with this. But I enjoyed the experience, but I never could figure out how I felt about it.
Yeah. I remember it came out not too long after, and I saw them both in close proximity, Splinter and Slither, which appeared on a previous 2020 list, but I constantly get the two of them kind of mixed up in my thought processes because I saw them probably within a few days of each other. Slither was released much earlier, but I saw them in proximity. But I remember liking them both, and I remember Splinter had this sort of darker sheen to the tone of the film, and the body horror effects were really alarming in this one, to a degree that I think most independent films can't quite achieve. They were very inventive and creative with it. So this is another one that I was pretty impressed to find it on this list. Number 6 on this is a film that I was also happy to see here. It is an understated little piece that recently, completely taking me by surprise, has made it on a lot of kind of undiscovered gems list that I see bouncing around the internet from time to time. It's Lake Mungo, written and directed by Joel Anderson, and it's a one of those fake documentaries. It's not trying to be funny, but it's a documentary presenting a fictional story. And I really wish that I could recall more substantive, specific details about it, because I remember being very impressed when I saw it with just the general frights of the film. I remember being pretty alarmed by it. It's pretty scary, and I remember it having this surprising amount of heart and depth underneath the surface of what it was trying to tell. As we've pondered on in different ways, it's one of those films that just kind of deals with grief and with tragedy, but in a horror context. But so much of the 2008 list was a sequence of like, ooh, it's been a long time since I've seen that. I want to see that again. So Lake Mungo is right up there with that. Blake, Nathan, have either of you seen this film?
This is the only movie on the list I haven't seen.
Okay. Nope. With only my memory of the experience of it to go on, not specifics, I remember that I would recommend it. And it has also, as I said, shown up on several lists of like, hey, undiscovered gems you should give some attention to. So with that additional validation, I'd recommend people checking it out. Nathan, hit us with number 5.
Number 5 is the man, the myth, the legend, Guillermo del Toro. Writer and director of Hellboy 2, The Golden Army, which I saw in the theater and remember liking, and that's it.
Blake, have you seen this?
Yep. I adored it. I
thought it was
liked it
great.
better than the first one.
I liked it better than the first one, too. And I'm fond of the first one. We covered the first one. But I think as a film and as an experience, it's better. The monsters are more inventive. They're more varied. The story is very compelling. It's really very strong. Honestly, as weird as this sounds, if people were to say, like, hey, which of the 3 Hellboy stuff out there should I see? Honestly, the one I would pivot them more towards is Hellboy 2, The Golden Army. I'm like, if you're only going to watch one, watch that one, because it's the most satisfying overall, I feel. I like it quite a bit. Blake, hit us up with number 4.
So number 4 is actually, of the ones I've seen on this list, the one I've seen the most recently for the first time. Eden Lake, written and directed by James Watkins, this is Michael Fassbender and
yes, it is.
I can never remember her name, but she's in Calvary.
Yes. Oh gosh, I feel so remiss that I've forgotten her name. But she's in Calvary and in Flight.
Yes.
Yes, a wonderful actor, and I feel really bad that I can't recall her name. I'm going to look this up so we can rectify that. But I will say that, like, while I'm looking this up, Eden Lake is a heavy film. I mean, this is not a film that you enter into lightly. This is a film that will assault you and make you feel bad for feeling bad about it. Like, it is a brutal...
Kelly Riley.
Kelly Riley. That's it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. I feel, again, huge apologies because she's really great. She's great in this. She's great in Flight. She's great in Calvary. I really like her every time I see her in something. Eden Lake is one of those movies that, without saying why or what happens, that is one of those endings that I was like, okay, this really challenges whether I should have watched this film. Like, this is one of those things, like, the ending is part of the point, but I was like, I walk away with such a...
As in, because it pissed you off or because it's so harrowing?
It is both.
Oh.
Like, the ending is infuriating.
Yeah.
And is devastating and is very unnerving. And is one of those, I mean, like, it is akin to the ending of The Mist, but in a way, after what you've seen, that leaves you more devastated. Like,
wow.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal. It's pretty rough. So, yeah, Eden Lake.
Well, between Eden Lake and Lake Mungo, I've got my summer travel plans.
You sure do.
Up.
That sounds like some fun. So number 3 on your list is our subject film for this week. So we'll be talking in much more depth in the next few moments about this one, but directed by Bruce McDonald, one of those films that Canadians, shout out to our recurring guest Vera Gowdy, Canadians love to mention, like in Canadian horror, it's like Pontypool. That's like we love Pontypool and Black Christmas, and like we have all these Canadian gems.
Well, we love Canada.
We sure do. So yes, it is Pontypool, directed by Bruce McDonald. Again, we are going to be revisiting this in extreme depth in a few moments. So Nathan, hit us with number 2.
Yes, number 2 I have seen. That is The Strangers, written and directed by Brian Bertino, covered on Fear of God episode 97. A just hell of a film.
Yeah. It's an all-timer for me.
I was really blown away when I saw this.
Yeah, it's a really excellent film. And listeners, if for some reason you have not, for whatever reason, gone back and checked out our episode on The Strangers, I'll make a soft recommendation that you do so, because purely by coincidence, I had seen recently the Mr. Rogers film, Who Wants to Be, or what?
A Millionaire?
Won't You Be My Neighbor? Won't You Be My Neighbor? Yeah, oh my God, Who Wants to Be My Neighbor? I'm like, what are you talking about? It's such
I don't know.
I know. Like, I don't know who that is.
This took a weird turn.
It really did. The documentary film, not the Tom Hanks film, the documentary "Won't You Be My Neighbor." I had seen that in proximity to our conversation about The Strangers, and I'm very proud of that episode. So yeah, by all means, go back and check that out. Blake, as you typically do when you're guesting on this show, you have the honor of revealing the number 1 favorite horror film of 2008.
This film, number 1, is giving me a chance to rectify years of Reed saying that there was an American version that was better than this one.
Hey now, listen.
That is Let the Right One In, directed by Thomas Alfredson, or it might be Thomas, I don't know.
I think Thomas, probably.
Thomas, yeah.
So
he, this, once again, I saw this probably 2010, 11, 12, somewhere around there, and was just blown away. It was the first, for a long time, I just couldn't get into vampire films, and this was the first one that kind of brought me back into the fold of really loving the idea of what vampires can be.
To your comment, do you dislike Let Me In, or just?
I actually need to see it again. When I saw it, it was fresh off of seeing this one, and I was very negative towards it at the time, but I'm far enough away from this one that I need to rewatch it and give it a fair shot.
Well, if you would like, just so you know, Fear of God episode 22, we covered Let Me In by that's Matt Reeves, isn't it?
Yeah, he's never forgiven us for that. It was the companion film to Dracula as part of the Universal Monster series. Yeah,
but did Matt Reeves direct that?
Oh yes, Matt Reeves directed it.
Nice.
And I will say that, like, to be clear, and I think I tried to specify this on the episode, but not as substantially as I'm about to now. So it is true. I do prefer Matt Reeves' Let Me In to Thomas Alfredson's Let the Right One In, but it is incredibly marginal, because if I prefer the Let Me In version as like a 9.5, Let the Right One In is like easily a 9.3 or a 9.4. Like my preference for it is very marginal. They're both, in my mind, outstanding films. Let the Right One In is a very powerful film, very affecting. And it has been some years since I've seen this version of it. And I've also read the novel, which is different in a lot of ways, and
yes,
it is it's also interesting in its own right. This is just, any way you encounter this story, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be worth your time. So whether that's the American remake, whether that's the Swedish original, whether that's the novel, this is a powerful and affecting story and is worth your time in whatever medium you can find it in. So yeah, I highly recommend it as well. And it's your number 1 favorite horror film of 2008, listeners. So before we move on into our discussion of Pontypool, Nathan, for one last time in this phase, would you do us the honor of pulling up the top 5 grossing box office worldwide, global box office?
Gladly, Reed.
For 2008. My one big comment, and Blake, look over the list and see if you can have any observations about its sort of substance. What I love about this is this seems to be a slight rise of the auteur, as it were. There's several films on here that are written and directed by the same person. I mean, yes, we had our comments about The Happening, written and directed by Shyamalan. But then you also have Lake Mungo, which was written and it was a writer-director. Hellboy 2, writer-director. Eden Lake, writer-director. The Strangers, writer-director. Even some of the other films on here, like Pontypool and Splinter, independent darlings that made big waves. The Strangers is like a big impacting film, but it was a very sort of understated film. So I love how most of this list, perhaps with the exception of Hellboy 2 and X-Files, and then probably The Happening because of Shyamalan's profile, those are probably the only three like major motion pictures. Everything else was independent based, and that really delights me. I like that about this particular wave this year. What else could you say, Blake?
Well, I mean, so of course I haven't seen Lake Mungo, but you're starting to see like a real attention to detail in the technique.
Yes.
And not so much in the scares. You're actually looking at characterization, improvement on characterization. You're looking at improvement on... you're starting to get, like, especially with Splinter, you're starting to see some really talented special effects being utilized.
Absolutely.
And in a way that you still don't see all that often today.
No, that's true.
And so... like there's just a lot of uniqueness. This, in my opinion, this is probably one of the strongest lists that y'all have had so far.
It's really good. Most of these films are really strong. There's there's a lot of inventiveness. I mean, I'll save my thoughts on Pontypool for that, but there's so many like inventive stories in this. Let the Right One In is an unconventional vampire tale.
Yes.
The Strangers is a home invasion story, but so much deeper and more than that. And Eden Lake, Lake Mungo, Splinter, all very inventive concepts and unique experiences. So yeah, this is a really strong list. I'm very, very happy with this. Nathan, how about our global box office?
How about it, Reed? Thank you. I am your eye in the sky here at Fear of God
Sunshine
Podcast.
Chopper.
Yes, that's it. So one, not in the top 5, but I do want to shout out numbers 8 and 9 here. Number 9 is Wall-E. So we're looking now at the 2008 worldwide box office. Number 9 is Wall-E. That is one of the last films my wife and I saw before our first child was born. Saw that in the theater, and my wife fell asleep because she was very pregnant. Number 8 is the repulsor blast heard around the galaxy, and that's Iron Man, the first Iron Man film.
Nice.
Wow.
At number 8, which is wild to consider how that franchise has climbed.
No
So looking at number 5, which is many, at least to me, not very fun entries here, but number 5 is Mamma Mia. Here I go again.
Oh, yeah.
Meryl Streep and everybody else.
I've got a soft spot in my heart for Mamma Mia.
Do you?
I mean, it is what it is, but but my wife and I have seen that, and she's a big fan of Meryl Streep, and she's most of the actors, and a fan of that music and everything, and yeah, I mean, it's a fun film. It's a really genuinely very fun film.
And to be fair, that actually, though I know it sounded that way, that wasn't me knocking it. I actually haven't seen it. Just a odd assortment here at the top. So there's that.
Sure.
Number 4, which I also haven't seen, is Hancock, the Will Smith pseudo superhero.
I actually kind of like that movie.
Really?
Really?
Yeah, I kind of do.
That was Reed's. Really?
No.
That was the Can I pull the
I don't
plug
remember
right now?
disliking it, but I remember it not having a major impact on me.
It's kind of the Shaggy Dog of like it's enjoyable for what it is, but
see the film that Blake Collier says is the Shaggy Dog of
kind
superheroes.
of like the Shaggy Dog.
Oh man!
Wow. All right, number 3 is the Jack Black starring Kung Fu Panda, which is it's pretty decent. It's fun.
Yeah, it's fun. Movie. Yeah.
You know, these movies you never knew unless you just pay attention to the stuff are like number 3 grossing for the year.
Right.
Speaking of movies that just don't feel like they earned a place here, it is number 2, 2008 worldwide box office is Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Still haven't seen it.
Yeah, it didn't. I tell you, it didn't earn its place. I'll tell you what earned its place was the freaking Indiana Jones original trilogy. That's what earned that place, the number 2 box office right there, because that film does not deserve it.
The number 1 film for 2008 worldwide box office is The Dark Knight. Breaking
Oh, yes.
1 billion. So listen to this. I'm going to do one little interlude real quick here. So this is the kind of stuff we would say for about, 8-9 months from now. But on my way to do this. I didn't look up that top 5 before I just said them all out. But what I did go and think is, I wonder what in this year, 2020, is going to be the big hits, right? Like,
oh boy,
what are, and I'll just do the top 2 just for kicks here. But I'm paying less attention to the films themselves as much as to the numbers, and know that we are recording April 23rd. Movie theaters are not open. Even when movie theaters do open, are people going to go to them in mass at all? Who knows? It's going to be a down year for a lot of things, movies particularly. But number 2 for the year is Sonic the Hedgehog, and number 1, which I've actually heard is pretty fun and good, is the new Bad Boys film. But think about this, y'all. Yeah, think about this. So, last year's number 1 grosser, who can guess?
Last year's number 1 grosser?
Easy.
Oh,
yeah.
gosh. Was it Avengers Endgame?
It was Avengers Endgame. Avengers Endgame made $2.8 billion. Listen to this. Bad Boys for Life, which in an insane world stands a chance of being the top grosser for the year, right? There's a world where that's feasible.
Oh, boy.
Made $419 million.
No way. Oh my gosh.
That is a staggering difference. Now,
no kidding.
Hopefully the latter part of the year.
Because Bad Boys for Life is actually the best entry in the whole franchise.
Yeah, I've heard it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
I've heard you are not the first person to say that, Blake. Like, fans of that franchise have been like, this is the one. Like, they really landed on a strong presentation of the formula, and
they tossed out all the bad of the other 2 and kept all the good.
Oh, that's great.
Mike Lowry.
There's a world where I would see that. So what?
I said Mike Lowry. Anyway, so that's just a fun little, and by fun I mean tragic, little picture of the worldwide box office of the last few years. Here we are.
All right, so that puts another installment, our last for at least a few weeks, installment of 2020 in the books. And now we are about to enter into, for this final phase conversation, again, the end of phase 1, not the end of the series. We're going to dive into Pontypool. This is my opening sort of shot across the bow is... This is, regardless of what I say, positive, or I don't know that I'll have much negative to say about this film, but regardless of what I'll say, this is the kind of thing that I absolutely love because it is completely inventive. It is taking a formula of the traditional sort of zombie trope film, completely turning it on its head, even to the idea of the concept of infection and how infection is spread in some tremendously interesting ways. And I just love when films can get extremely creative in their concept. This is not a big, box office smash, special effects ridden, extravaganza. This is just a simple story, very effectively told, rooted in character, rooted in circumstance, and it's the kind of thing that I just absolutely love. Nathan, had you heard of this film? Did you know anything about it before going into it?
I knew nothing and intentionally decided to stay that way before going into it. So no, this is my first time. I had never heard of it. I knew nothing about it. You lob me these titles sometimes, like WTF, Riri, what are we talking about here? So I did not go watch a trailer. I did not look at anything. Like, all right, here we go. And in fact, our companion piece, so we were, listeners at this point, you probably know this, we record 2 episodes at a time. The other episode we were recording was for the 3-hour director's cut of Dr. Sleep, spoiler alert, which is for next week. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna just gorge on this Dr. Sleep director's cut, and this Pontypool thing can be a bit of a throwaway, right? Like House of a Thousand Corpses or whatever. It's like, it's filler. Y'all.
I love it.
I got, and this movie is brief, which I'm grateful for.
It is.
That's part of its charm. Probably about the 40-minute mark, I was like, oh my God, I'm stressed out. I don't know if y'all have this sometimes, read you're probably have it less than perhaps Blake, just knowing your history with the genre, but like I have gotten to that place where I've let my guard down a little bit because I'm like, oh, 3 years of horror, I'm good. Yeah, that's fine. House of a Thousand Corpses, this is stupid. You know, like, that's not scary at all. Oh, look at Dr. Satan, that's not scary. You know, like you just your guard is down. And so and literally before watching this movie, not as part of watching this movie, but just in my life previous to watching this movie in the last week or so, I was like, man, you know, I kind of missed the feeling of being scared of something. Like, that's kind of fun.
Wow.
I queued this up. I was like, oh my God, I am so stressed out. I texted Reed, Blake, you'll love this. And listeners, the reason Blake is on is, one, we just appreciate him and he's a good conversationalist, but also he has a great affection for this film and had written some about it. We're like, okay, fine, come back. Well, Blake, you'll love this. So I was worried about going to bed after this movie. Like, like at the hour mark. Now, for me personally, I think the movie plateaus a little bit on the scare part, which is totally fine. I needed it. Like, but at like the 50-minute-ish mark, I was like, man, my wife's asleep. Everybody in my house is asleep. I got my earphones on. I'm texting Reed, but he can't cuddle with me. You know, like I am worried about going to bed. So yeah, it really did a number on me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
I'm impressed.
Yeah. So Blake, tell us a little bit. So like, to be perfectly honest with you, I didn't want to read your piece before our conversation just for the sake of freshness, but you know, like, what was your experience that prompted you to have such enthusiasm about it? So
it wasn't really with a lot of films that I kind of latch onto. It's never the first or second time I view. It's never in the moment that I kind of fall in love with it. It's on further reflection down the road when events in my life or reflections on my past or elements like that kind of bring these certain films into view, and they bring them to mind so often, and I kind of find a way to deal with aspects of what's going on in my life through the narratives of those films. And so, I in the moment, like I enjoyed it for just being a fun little flick that really is absurd, but also very fun and kind of mind-bending in a lot of ways. And so I think I just rented it on iTunes one night, thinking, oh, it's something to watch and let's give it a go. And I watched it and I was like, what the hell did I just watch? So
yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, it wasn't until probably, I probably saw this, maybe 2010, 2011, once again, a few years after it came out. And it wasn't until probably 2013 when my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's that going through that process with him and seeing the breakdown of his, not only his mind, but his body and his language shifted. This movie was the first thing that came to my mind as a way to kind of grasp what he was going through. This and Take Shelter, both. Which y'all both know how my feelings about Take Shelter. So,
absolutely.
And so those two movies were foundational and kind of allowing me to re-envision who my dad was, and be able to be in the space with him. To find empathy. And so, that's a lot of it. A lot of that piece is the piece I wrote about this back in 2013, 2014. I don't remember.
Blake, will you do us the favor in that context of briefly summarizing the film so that it kind of makes a little more sense, and then we can pivot into actual technical stuff? So basically, what we enter into is we enter into this radio studio in the small town of Pontypool, Canada. It's snowing. It's pretty much a blizzard. Grant Mazzy, the shock DJ, played by Stephen McHattie, who I have met.
Oh,
that's my one. Oh, he's super kind, super quiet.
Seems like he would be. Yeah, seems
kind.
Like he would be pretty cool. Yeah,
you'd be surprised how quiet he is. He's a man of few words, but yeah. Grant Mazzy shows up for work, and you get the sense that he's kind of on the tail end of his career as a shock jock. He's basically got this small role in a small town radio studio. It's like he's been through some trouble, and he's kind of fallen from the heights. And it's your typical morning show that you hear on any radio station, pretty much in any city. You get the helicopter guy who's looking at traffic. You get all this stuff,
Right.
And you hear everything that's going on outside through the ears of these people calling in. And as the movie goes on, you start to see that something is starting to go amiss outside. And you don't know what it is. People are starting to repeat themselves or not make sense. And their sentences are being screwed up and twisted. And then as the movie goes on, it becomes more and more apparent and that there's an infection going on. And as you find out, this infection is transferred through not only language, but meaning. And this is, it really, to say much more than that is to really give away a lot, if you can give away anything in this film, because it's so kind of mind-bending. But the guy who wrote it is actually the author of the book it was based on, the screenplay, Tony Burgess. And I actually read the book after I saw the movie, a couple of years after I saw the movie, and it is enraging. It's an enraging read, just because it's hard to follow his narrative, because he's trying to do what the point of the book is.
I thought you were talking about my co-host real quick.
Oh, yeah.
Enraging read, yeah.
Enraging
wow.
read.
That was actually my nickname in fourth grade.
Actually, that's also... No, just kidding. Because what he's doing is he's basically trying to formalize the narrative of the story. He's trying to confuse the narrative as he's writing it. Because this is a guy who got his degree in semiotics. Like, he had just gotten done getting his linguistics degree, and this idea of meaning and language and how we form meaning through words and those connections that we make with other people, and how that is so important and key to connection.
Wow. And
he had just gotten done getting this degree, and he wrote this novel. And he doesn't even like the novel now. Like, he's like, it's fine. It's okay.
Wow.
But
is it called Pontypool?
Pontypool changes everything. That's what it's called.
Yeah.
And it is maddening. Like, it is just...
What's so interesting about that is, like, I'm so... stuff like this is hard to execute in our information-soaked age, but I'm so thankful I didn't know any of this before watching it. Because... even if you were to ask me right now, like, is this a scary movie? I don't even know that it's that scary of a movie, but it's so well crafted and it's so intimate for so long that it's just super stressful. And I think for me personally, on paper, the concept is a little dumb, right? Like it's a little like elementary, which is fine. That's actually less criticism than it is just kind of like, I don't know, what? It's a movie about word inflections, So I'm really grateful to have shielded myself from some of that information, because I do think it makes for a more rewarding, especially first time watching.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, and I think part of the stress comes from, and this was such a wise decision on the filmmaker's part, is so much of it, well, really almost all of it, is contained in that radio station. So what's happening on the outside world, you're experiencing it the same way they are, which is through this audible conversation or this audio feed that's coming through. Now, I don't know if you heard this or knew this in your preliminary research, but originally it was conceived as a very, very experimental film. The opening shot...
I did hear that.
Yeah, isn't this crazy? The opening shot where you see the sound wave as Stephen McHattie is talking, and the sound wave is just sort of reacting to his vocal intonations. That was going to be the 90-minute film. That was going to be the only visual.
Oh, wow.
Was that sound wave as you're hearing everything else go on. I do think an experience like that would have been interesting to see, but I wonder if it would have limited its exposure and ultimately limited its effectiveness. But that was the way it was originally conceived, and it was also crafted as a 1-hour BBC radio drama, which
And
I
it's
do
so
think.
good.
Yeah,
It's so good.
I haven't heard it. So you've
Yeah,
gotten the chance to
yeah.
hear the radio.
Uh-huh,
Oh man,
it's so
I would
good.
love to hear it. I would love to hear it because Nathan mentioned it in passing in the opening that this was inspired in large part by the now infamous War of the Worlds broadcast that Orson Welles had done, I believe, in the 40s, which when it aired, because it was done very sort of real world-esque with music and pieces of concert playing, and then a newscaster would break in and say, there are tripods moving towards the city, like all this stuff. And so people got genuinely freaked out. So it was in this spirit and in that vein. I think this would work very, very effective. There was even a couple of times, because I'd seen it before, there was a couple of times where as I was watching it, only for a moment, I mean, I'm not ridiculous about it, but for a moment, I just kind of closed my eyes, like especially in the scenes where he's like in the broadcast and was trying to picture like, okay, what would this have been like if it was just the audio? And there's a couple of things where the sound design on this is so great and so effective. Stephen McHatty's voice is so deep and rich, and it's like, man, I bet it would be a really effective experience.
But see, what's funny about you saying that is like, I was so, and I actually agree with all you're saying, and I think why this film kind of works on a number of levels is I also, as weird as it sounds, loved the workplace drama of it. In other words, in the first 5 or 7 minutes, I was like, after I joined Poop Club with the woman slapping the window at the blizzard, and I was like, man, that was rough. But once that happened and, life moved on, just those first 5 or 7 minutes of them prepping for the show, and it's this real intimate kind of the engineering aspect. And I was like, this is kind of cool. It's kind of just like settling in, and then this steady thrum of dread that starts to escalate. So I really loved that aspect of it, which is, and again, there are movies like this. The benefit I had here was not knowing anything about it. So I didn't know it was literally all going to take place in the studio. And so the longer that goes, the more you're like, oh man, I'm really digging the structure of this. Yeah,
it's really fantastic. I have just 2 little trivial bits to point out, and then we can keep going with some more likes, dislikes. So just as a point of, I like nice reference, Stephen McHattie and Lisa Houle, who play Grant and Sydney, are married in real life, which I thought that was pretty cool. But one of my favorite things, and I had completely forgotten it if I ever knew it, but I thought this was so great, and I have to believe it's intentional, is as the title of the film is coming into focus, and it comes into focus, it comes into focus with like one letter at a time being revealed, and then suddenly you see, before the entire title Pontypool is played out, the center of it comes into focus first, and that's typo, the word typo, which given the context of the concept and of the film itself and its theme, I thought that was brilliant. I thought that was just really, really wonderful.
Yeah.
There's so much.
Blake, did you discover in your, digesting all this, is Pontypool a real place?
Yes, I believe it is actually.
Okay.
I think it is.
Yeah, it's like a super small town though.
Sure.
I
was just thinking about the typo
Vera might
aspect.
actually know. Yeah.
Vera.
Chime in.
Yes.
So
call into the show right now, Vera.
Exactly.
Not by helicopter though, please. Not by helicopter. There's a ton to like. This is not a dislike at all. Because I think it's hilarious. It's just the only thing that kind of feels weird and out of place is the freaking appearance of Lawrence and the Arabians, which I'm like, what? And I mean, like I said, it's not a dislike because I know radios do those gimmicky sort of things to have in there, but it's the only thing in the scheme of it all that kind of feels asynchronous to the rest of what they're doing. But it's still, like I said, it's not a dislike because I don't really have a dislike for it.
The dad of that troupe, or the elder one, he's the actual novelist, I believe.
You're correct that the novelist is present, but he's the guy that plays Lawrence, not the elder of it. It's the one who was singing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
okay.
That's the right. But you're right.
But he's in there.
That's
Yeah,
Tony.
he's in there.
He's in there. Yeah.
That's
his cameo.
See, I was almost right.
No, you were right in a way. You were a little right. I mean, I don't, to be honest with you, this is one, we don't have to do this. We're kind of in likes, dislikes right now, but I so badly just want to start talking about what this film's about. That if you guys are okay, like we can mention scares. There's sure a lot of them. There's a lot of things to like. But I'm just so fascinated by the concept of this piece. And Nathan knows, like we let the listeners vote on what the material is. So where possible, we try to choose the highest rated piece that the listeners have voted on that we haven't already covered. Now, in this particular instance, Nathan and I had even had a conversation beforehand where I was looking at the list, and yes, 2008 is a really great list, but I was pretty much beforehand, I was like, I'm really going to fight for us to talk about this movie, like, regardless of where it places, because it is so unique and interesting. I find the concept of... I can't remember, Blake, forgive me, I can't remember if you specifically hammered in hard on this part, but that basically the way this virus is spreading is by people using words that are infected. Yes. And the moment a word is heard does not automatically produce infection. It is when an infected word is heard and understood, which as a concept is really, that's high-minded in terms of like, you're really grasping it a lot to try to get or viewers to go along with you on that train. But I think the concept
on the midnight
is
meat train.
On the midnight meat train. Yes.
Midnight meat train.
Well, let me throw it there because there's so much I enjoy about this movie, but the logistics of how it works got a little confusing by the end. I was kind of struggling to track what was going on, other than just the linguistic aspect of it, which is pretty evident. But like to your point just then, Reed, how many times have you seen this? Is this second or more?
This is only my second time seeing it. Yeah. I had strong memory of it going into the second viewing, but yeah, this was only my second time.
Like to hear you state that comment about it's not just the hearing of an infected word, but the comprehension of it as well. I know that on a certain level that's conveyed, but it got a little confusing by the end. Especially by the end, whenever
they're trying to change the meaning of the words they're trying to avoid infection by changing the meaning of the infected words.
Yes.
So kiss is kill.
Right.
Kiss is kill. Yeah.
Yes. And what's interesting about that is that it's like, that's one thing that I appreciated this time that the first time through kind of frustrated me.
Yeah.
And Nathan, I don't know if this was comparable to your experience or not, but she gets hung up on the infected word kill. She gets hung up on it. So she catches it, and when she catches it, it begins to do its infected work on her.
Right.
But he can say it without being infected, and he clearly understands what the word kill means. He can just say it. And part of what I appreciated this time around, as we are all assessing the navigation of a global pandemic, which is viral in nature, a big point of conversation that has come up in a lot of my conversations recently is this: we're right now suffering under the COVID-19, the global pandemic, and it is what's called a novel virus, which means they don't understand fully how it works, and they don't know everything about every piece of it. They've learned a lot, particularly in the last few months, but they don't completely understand every aspect of it, which is what makes it so dangerous and part of what makes it so frightening. What I appreciated about this, in the context of what we're experiencing right now, is we don't know why she got infected by kill and he didn't. We don't know. And there is a certain specificity, a uniqueness to the person that is at play that the first time through I kind of saw as a cop-out. Well, why can he? Because in most zombie films, nobody's immune. Nobody's immune to the zombie
outbreak. There aren't
outbreak.
Degrees of immunity.
Exactly. Yes, precisely. But this I found significantly more interesting in that also, if memory serves, was not the first time she had said the word kill in the film. Mm-hmm. That earlier in the film, she had used that supposedly infected word, but this time it caught her. And what I viewed and again, Nathan, I'm inviting you in a second to speak to this. What I viewed the first time through as a confusion about the rules, I now viewed again, probably persuaded by current global events, I now viewed as a very specific train of viral integration, but in this weird sort of concept. So I hope that makes sense.
Yes, and I think, and again, I'm not even knocking the film. It's partly my comprehension by the end of it, but like when I queued up the movie with no foreknowledge, you're presented with this, you know, kind of workplace horror conceit that then, in other words, there was one moment that I loved, where at about 30 minutes in, Sydney kind of intimates, what if they're being played? So that was a real narrative pivot. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so stressed out. And so I'm not saying you can't turn the rules, right? Like, okay,
yeah,
I was understanding one thing, now, oh my God, what if none of this is happening? And so by the end, those rules come real quick. And
right.
I'm like, I understand it's linguistically caught and conveyed.
Transmitted.
It's like it's English. That word is, but it's not, you know. So yeah, again, it's not really a knock as much as just, you made the phrase a minute ago, high-minded. It's a very high concept that,
yes, sure,
that in about 5 minutes unpacks a lot. You know, that just doesn't, it just doesn't register as well on a first viewing as I imagine it would. I do want to throw out real quick, because I want us to, you know, if we're drifting out towards theme, that's totally fine. But I did want to, just because moments like this really kind of scream out at me in film sometimes, but you don't get them that often. But Stephen McHattie is great in this role.
Oh my gosh!
And there's a scene that, you know, again, I'm bought in within 5 minutes. I'm like, okay, I really like the tone. I like the kind of just energy. Is this serious? Is he meant to be comedic? Okay, they've got an interesting interplay. So I'm really buying in on all of the kind of puzzle pieces. And he's got such a great persona as a performer and as the performer playing a shock jock. But there's this moment where Ken Lonnie, who in the film, if you don't watch it, listener, is there, we've referenced kind of eye in the sky, this helicopter traffic cam guy who starts calling in, describing wild things. And y'all have seen it more than once now, so hopefully you remember this moment. There's this moment where Glenn, right? Grant
Mazzy. Yeah, Grant
Mazzy, and he's been drinking already. But there's this moment where the camera, he's just like full view in the studio. It's not even a medium shot. It's a real close on him behind the mic and stuff, where he's just leaning back in his chair, hearing Ken describe this and staring at his hand. Does this scene ring out at all?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so good. Because it does so much to like convey this character's confusion and bafflement and incredulity, is like, and also like, well, wait a minute, am I drunk? You know what I mean? Like this, there's so much happening in that moment. I really wanted to kind of sing the praises of that moment.
No, absolutely. Blake, I feel like Nathan and I have kind of volleyed for quite a bit. But how do you process and by the way, listeners, seek out the Mockingbird piece written by our very own Blake Collier, about Pontypool and about this experience. It's well worth your time, but unpack a little bit about your thoughts and feelings. Share thoughts from the article, your own thoughts, new thoughts, whatever, about this film.
So yeah, This is not going to necessarily be a key to people's understanding of the film, because I think it rails against completely being understood. But
understandably,
yeah. But I think the only reason why I'm able to like grasp elements of it more than maybe some is because for whatever reason, around the same time I watched this film, I read the full oeuvre of Walker Percy. And Walker Percy, his nonfiction work is inundated with this fascination, this obsession, really, with language and what that means. And and there's a thing that I allude to in my piece, that this moment in Helen Keller's life, he just zeroes in on, and it comes back in his writings over and over again, and it's it's the moment where she finally understands meaning, and her teacher's trying to find a way to make to connect a word with what it means. And there's this moment where she writes in her autobiography that her teacher places one hand under a running stream of water, and then signs in the palm of her other hand, water. And in that moment, like, the whole world was unlocked to her.
Yeah.
This world of language, this world of meaning was opened up to her, and she understood. It's in my head when I read that, and I think Walker Percy had this in mind too, is that this is the creation story. We understand. We are given language, and with the language we are able to connect with each other.
Yeah.
And that's why, the two precepts are love God and love one another.
Right. Yeah.
It's because we have the tools now. We can speak and we can connect. And I think what's so beautiful about that is because you can go down the rabbit hole with what that means, because water, specifically for Helen Keller, was a significant word.
Yeah.
In that moment, for that specific reason. It's not necessarily the specific word for another person.
Sure.
It's not even if she heard water in another context, it would not have the same meaning as water in that moment. And so when I'm thinking about the movie and the Pontypool and these seemingly shifting rules of how this virus works, for me, like I can almost say, well, she says kill at one point, but it doesn't mean the same thing. It's not the infected meaning.
Right. Yes.
It's when she hits upon the infected meaning of that word, when it becomes real, that it begins to repeat itself. And then Grant, he says it, but that word doesn't have the same meaning to him in that moment as it does for her.
He's not thinking about it in the same context.
So there's a lot of ways that you can kind of take this and just the complexity of what linguistics does and language and how meaning can. I mean, we've all been married.
Yes.
How many times have you talked past each other? And you're basically saying the same thing.
Yeah.
But you've talked past each other, and it's because you're thinking about two different meanings in the same time, and you're moving past each other, and really it just takes one reconnection to bring those meanings together, and it doesn't always happen. But it's how often we talk past each other, and how often we that breakdown of communication happens. And that's kind of the point. That's the big takeaway I get from Pontypool a lot of times, especially in this current climate, is how often our language breaks down for us, whether it's intentional or not. And because just the repetition, the repeating the word once it's been infected. We keep saying it. We keep saying it. We keep saying it. It becomes an echo chamber in its own way, and it's just it's so prescient. This movie.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I mean, gosh, I want to verbalize out 6 things at the same time. Yep. You mentioned this complexity of talking past each other. One of my most frustrating moments are the moments when I get stuck inside my own head when I'm having a complex conversation with my wife or with a dear friend or something like that, and I get stuck inside my own head to the degree that somebody can speak a plain thing to me. They can say a very to the naked ear would be easily understood, but for some reason in my mind, because of where my head is at, it has become a spider web of all these. Well, did you mean this by implication? Did you mean this? Do you really want me to do this? What are you not saying? And all these other sort of complexities. When if I were able to just simply take a pause and a step back, I would recognize that was actually quite simple. It did not need to be as complicated as I made it. And so that's a factor. The other thing, oh my gosh, I want to spit this out so that I don't lose it. And Nathan, I'm not trying to exclude you from the conversation. I just got a lot going on in my head. So the other thing is you mentioned that when she grasps hold of kill and how it means something different to her, like that really stuck out to me this time, not her specific, but when the doctor is explaining that it is understanding which causes the virus to take hold. It is understanding the meaning of the word. And then I started thinking about how innocent it is if a toddler or an adolescent says a word that's very volcanic and has tremendous significance to it, but they don't know
understand.
that.
Yeah.
They don't know that.
It's mimicking. Yeah.
Exactly. So to them, it is merely repetition. That's all it is.
Yeah.
But this statement just almost knocked me over. Emotionally, it literally knocked me over. That, like, then they catch the infected meaning.
Yeah.
Then they get, racist phrases, misogynistic phrases, sexist phrases, things that, like, then they've caught the infected meaning. And now once the infected meaning has taken hold, now it is so much harder to break free from that association. And if they've caught, God forbid, the infected meaning while somehow simultaneously not realizing they're infected, and then it continues to proceed out that way. And what makes so much of the final moments of the film so galvanizing is he's making an active effort to try to get people to misunderstand.
Yeah,
like,
he's destroying meaning.
Yes, I need you to break your understanding of this word, because these words are infected, and they are, and then, in my last statement, and then I'm going to pause for a moment, like, then it ties to something else, and I'm only hitting these thoughts and running. We can certainly unpack any or all of them or leave them where they are on the table. But then it connects to so much in the scriptures is tied to language and is tied to, people's names are meant to invoke destiny and meant to invoke purpose, or meant to be an identifier of tremendous significance. But the Gospel of John opens up with, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And later on in the chapter says, and then, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And yes, it's speaking about Christ. The chapter itself is even talking about that. But the fact that it identifies it as word, a word, a communication method, and not only something to be spoken and heard, because again, in Pontypool, it's not just the hearing that does it. It's the grasping, the understanding, the capturing the meaning of what it is that causes this change in who you are. And in the Pontypool, that's a negative, but there's so many places for our imaginations to go about catching the power or the significance of a word, either an infectious one driving you downward, or, I would posit, the potential for a liberating one driving you upward. Anyway, great.
Well,
so much going on.
Jump in there.
Sure.
If I had any concern about this conversation, it was that it would be filled with words and we would struggle to attach meaning and comprehension to them. And I actually don't say that lightly. This movie drove me back to the book I read a couple months ago and I referenced on the show, called Antisocial by the journalist Andrew Morantz.
Right.
And I went and browsed my notes from that book and want to share a few quick quotes. One, to guide us, and Reed, you just actually almost paraphrase it, is he said, "To change how we talk is to change who we are." And this whole book is basically about what happens when the image that's coming to mind is like Play-Doh, the old Play-Doh that you squish through the thing and it makes spaghetti. I'm talking about that image of the old Play-Doh commercials. Right. What happens when you take a civilization's vocabulary, that is the Play-Doh, and run it through the grist mill of the internet? Like, that is effectively what he's after, and makes a very cogent case that we have eroded and degraded to a point of incomprehension. Because it is worth noting, Reed, to your note about what Grant does at the end of the film, where he's trying to chaotically dissociate meaning. The bombs still fall. Like, that does not succeed, right?
Right. In the context of, I think we're meant to believe that he fails in his attempt, at least to save their own life, although the verbalizations over the top of the credits might lead you to interpret it in a variety of different ways. But no, I think in the context of the court, because there is audio over the entirety of the credits, and they address in passing glances like, I was so confused, and then everything just became clear, and so they talk about people like coming out of the virus as well.
Well,
I don't know if that was directly related to Grant in the context of the film.
Well, but you're making a good point here for me a little bit, and that's that he so disrupts it. And another quote from the book, it says, "At some point, the broken American vocabulary will be replaced by a new one, but whatever comes next will bear the scars of the current disruption." Wow. And one last quote here, and then we can try to weave all of this into something cohesive. And this is not a person writing from a faith perspective. Like, so understand that, listener, like, a Christian journalist, that's not where this is coming from. But one of the things he says, and rather forcefully, he says, what we need, and urgently, is a new moral vocabulary. And, Reed, you referenced the John scripture a moment ago of the word became flesh, and I think in the context of this movie, we mutilated that as well. Like,
yeah. And
we are so blithe and careless with words, and so there's angles you can approach here. There's Blake, which I hadn't thought about until you brought it up, but there's the degradation of communication, which is itself an echo of what's happening in this film. Then, and that's a neurological thing, right? Like, this is a medical sort of neurological breakdown in the ability to communicate. Then there's also what I think this book, Antisocial, is after: the willful, intentional, violent clobbering of vocabulary and degrading communication until all we're left with is pointing fingers and grunts and anger and violence, right? I don't know. I just think there's a lot. There's kind of too much to wrangle here.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and the director had even said, you talk about the degradation to violence, and I didn't want to read this entire quote. I'll try to summarize it briefly, but the director had gone on record to say, like, kind of how the virus works. And he says, it starts with just a vain sort of repetition, trying to just like get it out. And then you get confused in your own thoughts, and eventually the infection takes hold to the degree that all you can see as an infected person as your only option is to like chew or rip the words out of the other person's mouth. And which is gruesome. It's so gruesome, to think about. But then I even when I just sat there and said it, oh my Lord, there is almost too much. There's too much to wrangle down from this thing. Because then I think about like we're talking about cultural expressions and social expressions. We've touched on marriage and relational expressions. Then there's also I didn't mean to use the word, but when I invoke the word like vain repetition, that brings to mind the type of prayer that Christ urged us not to pray, like not to simply repeat words meaninglessly. Don't just sit there and think you can use some kind of chant and as if that's going to be a substantive prayer. Like, there has to be a combination of the communication itself and then a grasping hold of what it is that you are communicating, that you like the meaning behind what it is that you're saying. And I feel like so much of what I see in our speech and in our discourse, of course, I'm once again beating up on social media platforms at the moment because of the ways that they degrade discourse and they make it about sound bites that feel clever in the moment, but so distort the point and so miss the much more complex, much more human. Like, I see in far too many contexts to even try to rattle off a list. I see far too many examples where somebody makes some egregious comparison of saying like, oh, so you're okay with this, but you're not okay with this. And the issues are so far, there's such a huge canyon, but you're minimizing and reducing the conversation to this really weird sort of like, oh yeah, well, if life is precious here, then it needs to be precious over here too as well. And I'm like, yeah, it needs to be precious everywhere. I don't know what point you think you're trying to make. Like, I don't understand why you think you're getting anywhere by simply reducing the conversation to some weird mic drop soundbite you're trying to express that has no root in human complexity, human understanding. It's just sound and fury. That's all it is. It's just this, but in the context of this film, and then I'll shut up, it is spreading an infected sense of conversation. It's spreading the method of communication that reduces enlightenment, that reduces humanity, that reduces understanding and compassion, and simply cares about silencing the opposition, simply cares about quieting anybody who would agree with you, and frankly, most of them, to try to make them feel stupid, which is offensive to me.
Yeah.
Like, why are you going to try to make any point and try to persuade somebody over to your side by making them feel stupid? I don't get that. Why would you try to do that?
Well, and once you get to that point, because I think you could say that there's been a language problem since day one in America. Like, there have been words that have been slowly breaking down. It's only until the internet happened that it's kind of just had this steep like lift
right,
up.
An exponential
It's
curve.
been yeah, exactly. And so, but I think we're starting to see what happens in the aftermath, because I think it's already happened on some level, is if words no longer have meaning, then all we have is groundless, disconnected perspective.
Yeah.
And there's like, when I try to talk to someone who is on the other side of the political fence from me, we don't have any words to connect on, because the word I say means something different to them.
Right.
And so whenever those common meanings, those connected meanings, whenever those are gone, and I think they've been gone for a few years now.
Yeah.
We're lost. There is no hope for a break from this polarity that we're feeling in the political and cultural spheres, because of, and it's a downer. Like, I don't
of course,
I don't take pride in diagnosing it as such, but I feel it, like, in my everyday life, like seeing on Twitter or on Facebook or in the news or whatever, like, words do not mean anything that connects us. Like,
well, but I think
so,
you know, I'm just sitting here absorbing all this, and it's way too much. But
right,
that's not a knock against any of us. It's just trying to wrestle this down. But you know, I think that quote read that you expounded upon from the writer, I believe, about it degrades so far to just violence, and not just violence that we're sort of accustomed to, or threats of violence that we're accustomed to, but so graphic and discomforting violence to how did you even say it? How did he say it? That
that you try to chew the words out of the other person's mouth. Yeah.
Well, and I think, you know, I think we're there, like in terms of intent, you know, like not necessarily physical.
Of course.
But Blake, to your point about that feeds into just that political discourse, and I do think there's a moment where you have to, because our words, and Blake, you made the comment of other side of the aisle type stuff, like, one, you've got political conversation, and then you've got social media. Those are two different things, but when you marry those things,
yes.
Our words now literally mean nothing. And so for me personally, I have backpedaled a whole lot from the thing, you know, once I sort of comprehended, okay, this is what social media as a construct is doing, and that's terrible. And so I backed off a whole lot, because once you started realizing it's like, I'm not going to change your mind. You're not going to change my mind, which ultimately that means we're not listening to each other. Our words are falling to the ground, or just getting evaporated into the air. Like it means nothing. And I want to circle back around to this notion of the word becoming flesh. And I think, and I'm not pivoting to Jesus is our answer, but I am pivoting to the word becoming flesh is our answer. And I mean those as both the same and separate. So I just today, I had to run a couple errands. I got to leave the house for a moment and started and got 20 minutes into, I'm looking at it right now, 26 minutes into a recent Why Is This Happening podcast with Chris Hayes. And he had a guest on there. I'd never heard of this person, but the title attracted me. The title of the episode was called Solidarity in a Disaster. And I didn't know this would connect to this tonight, but the guest he has on there is a woman named Rebecca Solnit, who is a writer who wrote a book around the time, I believe she's a journalist as well, but wrote a book around the time of Katrina, had been doing a lot of research on, I didn't know anything about this major earthquake in San Francisco from years ago, but her book is called A Paradise Built in Hell.
Ooh.
Yeah. And she talks about how in times of chaos and disaster, we want to believe it's this broken thing and people aren't connected and people are, relational degradation is taking hold. But what she kind of posits in this book is that it's actually through her study of things like this earthquake in San Francisco, of things like Katrina, and now, of course, this book is climbing the charts again because of the moment we're in. She says it is these acts of generosity, it is these family meals, it is these moments of grace that break through the hell to find paradise. And where the only reason I bring that up right now is just to say I think words are both literal and verbal, and words are also actionable and flesh.
Yes.
And I think, Reed, you were trying to make this point about 45 minutes ago, but all of us got tsunami'd here by all that's going on. And but how, to that antisocial reference of what we need is a new moral vocabulary, and what does that mean, and what does that look like? And Solnit, this author of A Paradise Built in Hell, tells this story of watching news footage of Katrina, and a newscaster is in a store, and there's a little African American boy behind him, I think, the journalist, the newscaster, who is what appears to be pilfering a pink T-shirt, and the newscaster on live TV says something like "not your color," doesn't look like that's your color, and is real dismissive and condescending. And listen, y'all, she's not speaking as this person of faith, which I think a lot of people of faith don't have a good moral vocabulary. But where she's trying to pivot this to is like, you have no idea what this child might be going through.
Yeah.
And on national television have just reduced, as the phrase you used, Reed, human complexity down to a derogatory, verbally violent soundbite.
Yeah.
And I think, what does it mean, and what do we have to do? And one, I do think it calls for a hell of a lot of self-reflection and self-excavation to answer this question. But like, what does it mean to have a better moral vocabulary? I'll say this last quote and then move on to you guys and kind of be done, I guess. But
sure.
Another quote from Marantz is, he basically says, there is a narrative. Like, you don't get to just ignore that a narrative can exist in the world, and especially in American society. And he says the point isn't don't have a narrative. The point is, what kind of narrative are you going to be a part of and choose? Wow, and it's just really powerful. Yeah. And what is a narrative? A narrative in our common comprehension is a written, a verbalized thing, right? A story being told. And you either are actively shattering a narrative, or you're creating and building one, right?
Yeah. I mean, this, and Oh gosh, there's so much. I'm gonna blast my final shot across the bow, pivoting kind of out of what you're talking about here. I did find Grant's kind of final parting shot. So in the course of the film, it all comes to light in the space of about the last 20 minutes that they realize how the infection is being spread, how and then in the last 10 minutes, he realizes how to stop the infection is by introducing a confused misunderstanding to break the grasped infected misunderstanding. And then he goes onto the radio and he's rapidly trying to just spit out a bunch of nonsense. And he's even, I kind of love that he's failing at spewing out nonsense. Like he's making too much sense because he's trying to just sort of oppose meaning, but he's making too much sense in it. It's not nonsense, But then finally, in this very sort of rebellious spirit, he just bursts out and finally is just like, well, you know what, friends? We were never making sense. And I remember when he finally gave that whole big speech. I don't have the whole thing in front of me, but he gives this whole big spiel where he says, we were never making sense, and we're doing all of the same things that we were doing before. And he ends basically by saying, it's not the end of the world, folks. It's just the end of the day. And to your point, Nathan, of what you talked about, each day we are participating in a narrative. We're building one, and to a degree have to take, and I don't know that this is fully the point that the passage from Antisocial was making, but that we are to a degree culpable in the narrative we're choosing to perpetuate. We are culpable for what we're choosing to foster, what we're choosing to put out into the world, and we are responsible for it to a degree. There are things that we cannot control and cannot hold, but I love that he just sort of towards the end in this film is just like, no, you know what? We were never making sense. Like this is not the end of the world. It's just the end of the day. And there are stories and words and meaning swirling all over and all around us. And I think it's really, like we've all said multiple times, it's almost too much to wrangle down everything this particular film, now 12 years old, has to say to 2020 in the midst of not only viral concerns, but language concerns and meaning and understanding concerns. It's a very affecting moment. Before we pivot to the fog meter, Blake, do you have any other passing thoughts, parting observations, anything else you'd like to share?
No, I think on the whole, I would largely like to leave it where we left it. I do want to point out one thing, and we've said it numerous times already, but I just want to point out that whenever Sydney and Grant are talking to each other and they're figuring out what's going on, the two words that are central to it are kiss and kill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right.
And if you think about the nature of those two words, one is love and the other one is hate or violence.
Violence, right.
And he keeps trying to confuse the meanings of those. And man, I tell you what, how many times have we confused the meanings of those two things?
Good Lord, come on now. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I just want to point that out because it's small and it's right there in front of you, but it took me several viewings to recognize that.
Really grasp that. Yeah. A remarkable film in a number of ways. I think that goes without saying, regardless of how viewers may particularly feel about it. It's your third favorite horror film. Clearly, I love that it made it so high on the list. I love that it's been seen by that many people and that many people paid attention and that it stayed with them. I'm hoping, unlike as we have referenced previously how Paranormal Activity has climbed our listening charts, and your episode that you were on, Blake, Saw is up there as well. I hope Pontypool is a film that hits people's radar if they haven't already seen it, because it's pretty amazing. But let me not tilt my hand too much before we go to the fog meter. Nathan, you want to explain?
Let's hope it's the Shaggy Dog of Fear God podcast, right?
Yes, exactly. Nathan, why don't you explain the fog meter to our listeners, please?
Oh, if I can inject some meaning into these words. The fog meter, it is the metric we use on every film to assess its fear factor, or how scary a thing is, and its God factor, or how substantive a thing is. I will start, as it was my first viewing on the fear. This movie isn't there's one kind of scene of some relative kind of gore, or just kind of harrowing visuals. Otherwise it's pretty mild in terms of the visual element. But I mean, for the pure stress factor that I experienced, as far as the suspense and thriller goes, I mean, I'm not hyperbolically saying I was worried about going to bed at a certain point. So, I mean, 9? This movie's,
Right.
I mean, at least for the 2/3 of it,
It's stressful.
It was just one long visit to poop lip.
Absolutely. Blake, what would you give it for the fear factor?
I think I'm gonna double that. I'm gonna say it's 9, because even at the time when I first watched,
I thought you were about to give it an 18.
Oh yeah, no. Even the first time I watched it, I mean, the one moment of gore that you spoke of is because everything else is so tame. It stands out significantly, and it's a little bit unexpected in the moment. You think something's coming, but you don't know what. And when it happens, you're like, oh, whoa.
Yeah,
but you are exactly right. The tension is just unbearable, especially in the first viewing. Once you kind of got the grasp of the narrative itself, or the basically the run of the movie, repeat viewings are less tense. But man, it still holds up even now. So
yeah, no, remarkably so. For myself, what I think dilutes the fear element for me, particularly on this second viewing, was simply being so drawn in by the concepts and so fascinated by the concepts. So I found myself thinking more about what was happening than emotionally experiencing it. But even with that, I would still give this a 7 on the fear factor. I mean, everything you're saying is accurate. It's a very stressful film, inventive in the way it navigates its fears. For myself, on the substance meter, I'm not going to pull any punches or give too many qualifiers. Guys, this is a 10 for me on the substance. I mean, it has so much on its mind, and in ways that I found unbelievably resonant to what we're experiencing right now, what I think about and experience so many times in my life. It's a big 10 for me. Blake, what would you say?
Oh, easily 10. I've gotten more out of this film than just about any other horror film as far as content and ideas, and it's helped me through the grief of my dad's disease. I mean,
right?
so
Yeah, no, seriously, yeah.
So yeah, it's a hard 10.
Yeah, understood. Nathan, what say you?
I think I tend to attach substance to also just an emotional response too. I don't quite have that at the moment. But I do agree, just sort of philosophically and in other sort of intellectual ways, it's got a lot happening in it. And so I'm gonna go with an 8.5.
8.5.
So the official fog meter reading is at a 9.
Wow.
Oh,
I never. When you told me the name of this movie, I was like, what the hell is that? Pontypool. What kind of word is that? That don't mean nothing. That's got to be a typo. I mean, y'all,
It is a typo.
all I did was be like, okay, it's like 9 o'clock. Oh, it's 80 minutes. That's not too bad. I'll turn this on 20 minutes later. Like, oh my God. I'm so scared. Yeah.
Well,
I'm not delighted that it wound you up like that, but I'm kind of delighted that it wound you up like
No, I am too. That's fun. No, I get a kick out of it.
So, Nathan, does that mean that you would recommend Pontypool to people?
Yes, unquestionably. I mean, I think, and I think there's like destructive, nihilistic kind of scare factor that would be hard to recommend. This isn't really that.
Understood.
It's more
Yeah,
just like
right.
really well crafted,
Sure. Yeah.
thriller, suspense type of filmmaking.
Yeah, absolutely. Blake, I think we all know your answer, but
Yeah.
do us the favor anyway.
Oh yeah, I highly recommend it. And if you actually want to get a sense of what it's like to be one of the characters infected in the movie, try to read the novel it's based on.
No, wow. I think you've dissuaded me against that. That would be
I've actually read some of his other work, and he's a fascinating writer, and I highly recommend reading some of his other work. Pontypool Changes Everything is a tough go.
tough one. Understood. I, especially after the second viewing, I champion this film. This film deserves to be seen. It is so wildly inventive and unique.
Did you hold back on your enthusiasm? I just don't recall you really pushing hard.
Yeah, because here's
that's
the thing,
totally
man.
fine. I just
Yeah.
That's why I went into it so kind of like ho hum. I was like, oh well, this is it. I don't remember you pushing hard. I'm grateful.
Because
That's not me criticizing.
No, sure, I understand. But like I have sometimes been like, oh my God, I love this film. You got to see this film. And you come back and you'll be like, that was good. I like it. And so like for me, and also in fairness, like my first time viewing, I don't think I fully wrapped my head around it. And I remember being really interested in it, but not nearly the experience. I mean, and I've said it in every episode that we've had on 2020, that it is inescapable for me. I cannot deny that I am viewing these films in light of cultural events.
Sure.
And I'm viewing them in light of what's happening right now. And I think that fueled so much of my response to this movie, to the degree that I'm like, oh my God, like I needed this movie right now. Yeah. This is something that's really interesting and really just helped me to, again, as metaphors in films and stories so effectively do sometimes, really contextualize a lot of the struggle that's happening and a lot of the difficulty that's happening in a way that I found really, really affecting. And so also there was, I had not seen it this second time when I was really pushing for it. I just remembered really liking it, being very interested by it, knowing its subject. I was like, this could make for a really interesting conversation. So to that degree, I didn't want to chime in and be like, oh my, but it would also be fair to say that my enthusiasm beforehand existed, but was not near what it is right now.
Well, and to be fair to
time.
you, Reed, I'm a human who just doesn't know what he wants anyway. So like if you'd hyped it to me, I would have been like, oh, interesting. You play it cool to me. I'm 30 minutes. I'm like, what? Didn't Reed warn me? Like, no, I get it. It's tough being my friend, and I'm sorry for that.
That's so funny. That's so funny. But yes, I would champion people seeing this movie, and I've said it once already, but definitely once you've seen the film, or maybe even to sort of fuel seeing the film, check out Blake's piece over at Mockingbird, where he unpacks a lot of these same thoughts, some of which he shared here, but much more there on that article. And thank you very, very much, Blake, for joining us for this conversation. It's been a real honor to have you back, as always. So next week, everybody, we're doing something pretty special. This phase has come to an end. We will be revisiting it later in the year, and we'll let you know when that's happening. But next week, we are going back to old Uncle Stevie, and we are going into our next Quarterly King. Every 25 episodes or so, we have a big conversation with...
That's an important phrase.
or so, exactly. We have a big conversation with some of our friends about a work of Stephen King. So next week, we are going to be talking about the very recent Mike Flanagan adapted and directed Dr. Sleep, which is the sequel to The Shining. It is based on Stephen King's novel, sequel to The Shining, but Flanagan has done some really interesting things to both adapt King's novel and follow up Stanley Kubrick's The Shining in some really inventive ways. If you have been meaning to check it out and need that extra push, do so now. Next week, we're going to have all of our friends back again for another conversation about Dr. Sleep.
Can I throw out there, Reed, to the listeners? Yeah. We specifically zero in on the director's cut of Dr. Sleep, which is available in the physical copy. So if you've got a Redbox near you, that's how you can access that. But yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So check out that, and we'll see you next week for that. Blake, again, thank you for being here.
Yeah,
Nathan, thank you as always for having this conversation with me every week. And listeners, as we say every episode, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. Don't mistake my meaning there, not the end of the conversation. And in that spirit, we encourage you to fear nothing else and be on your way rejoicing.
Amen.
Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week, guys.
The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. And you can continue the conversation in a variety of ways. You can start by visiting thefearofgodpodcast.com for all the latest news and episodes, or for merchandise and to contact us directly. You can follow us on Twitter at The Fear of God, on Instagram at Fear of God Podcast, or join the Facebook Fear of God discussion group. Special thanks to Jacob Hunt of jacobhuntcomics.com for our artwork, to Lee Wright, who helped me, Reed Lackey, write our theme music, and to Tyler Smith at morethanonelesson.com for making our show possible. Lastly, be sure to subscribe to us on your podcast platform of choice, and if you listen to us through iTunes, we would greatly appreciate a rating and a review. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next week.